orchestrated entirely new story with fresh names, setting, and emotional beats. Orchestrated entirely new story with fresh names, setting, and emotional beats. Snow came down over Cleveland in wet ropes that night. The kind that didn't drift so much as fall straight, like the sky had quit holding it. Travis Mercer stood in the service lane behind the Hartwell Pavilion with his breath fogging out in front of him and a leather satchel sitting open in the slush at his feet. $60,000, banded in 10s and 20s, packed so tight the bundles had gone hard as bricks, the bills catching the orange light off the loading bay. He had $31 in his checking account. He had a notice taped to his apartment door giving him until the end of the week. He had a son asleep 4 miles away with a heart that had been wrong since the day he was born, and a hospital bill folded in his jacket that he hadn't let himself add up. There were no cameras back here. The man who dropped it was already gone. Nobody on this earth would ever know. He stood there a long time, long enough that the snow built up white along his shoulders. Then he picked the satchel up, carried it inside, set it on the marble counter of the pavilion's lobby desk, and slid it across to the woman in the uniform. "This was sitting in the lane out back," he said. "There's a lot of cash in it. You'll want security to lock it up and find whoever lost it." He was already turning to go when she asked for his name, and he said it didn't matter, and he walked back out into the cold. 40 feet up, behind a curtain of black glass that looked down on the rear entrance, a woman named Vivian Cross stood with a champagne flute she had not touched and watched the whole thing happen. She watched him find it. She watched him stand over it in the snow for 2 full minutes, which she had counted. She watched him carry it inside and come back out with nothing in his hands and no expression on his face, like a man who had done something ordinary. She set the flute down on the table behind her without a sound. Then she told her assistant she wanted a name, and she meant to have it tonight. The hallway light in his building had a flicker that he'd stopped reporting to the super around the time he stopped reporting most things. Travis came in shaking the snow off, and the apartment was cold enough that he could see his own breath in the kitchen, which meant the radiator had quit again, which meant another night on his knees with a flashlight in his teeth. He hung his coat on the chair and went down the short hall first, because he always went there first. The door to Jesse's room stood open a crack. He listened. He'd learned to read the boy's breathing the way other men read the road. There was a sound it made when things were fine and a different sound when they weren't. And tonight it was the fine sound, slow and even, a small machine running the way it was supposed to. He let himself breathe. He had been a firefighter once, a medic on Rescue 9, 11 years, the best years he'd had. Then a gas main let go under the Carlisle Arms on a March morning, and he went into a building that was coming down in pieces. And on the third trip in, a stairwell pancaked and took the use of his left shoulder with it. They rebuilt the shoulder twice. It never came back right. The pension covered groceries and the copay on Jesse's cardiologist and almost nothing past that, so he covered the rest with a truck and a toolbox and night delivery runs that went until the city went dark. He fixed people's sinks now. He fixed their wiring and their broken steps. He was good at it, careful at it, and most nights it was enough to keep the two of them above water by an inch. His wife had been gone 2 winters. A man texting at a green light, a phone she never saw coming. The fire department had handed Travis a folded flag at her service because Maya had brought them lasagna every Christmas and learned all their kids' names. He kept the flag in the bottom drawer of the dresser under the winter sweaters. He hadn't opened that drawer since the funeral. What he opened instead was the mail, and that morning the mail had been spread across the kitchen table in 3 crooked stacks. Cardiology, gas and electric, rent. The rent stack had a single page on top, heavy stock, the words "Final Notice to Vacate" printed across it in a font that was trying to look polite about it. 5 days. Jesse had come out in his socks dragging his blanket, climbed onto the chair across from him, and reached for a page near the bottom of the medical stack. An old one, the corners gone soft. He held it up. The logo across the top was a deep blue shield. "Is this the one that said no?" he asked. Travis looked at it. Sentinel Health ran along the top in clean, confident letters, and stamped across the middle in red was the word "denied." "That's the one," he said. "How come they got to say no?" "Because sometimes the people who write the rules decide the rules can mean whatever's cheaper for them that day." Jesse thought about that with his whole face the way he thought about everything. Then he set the page back exactly where he'd found it, careful, like it was something that could break. Being broke isn't the same as being a bad guy, he said, in the flat sing-song of a kid repeating a thing he'd heard 100 times. Travis felt something pull in his chest. That's right, bud. Or being mean. Or that. The boy's lips had gone a shade he didn't like in the cold, so Travis got up and wrapped him in the blanket and the spare coat and sat him by the oven with the door cracked while he went to war with the radiator one more time. It was a little after 1 when the heat finally moved through the pipes. A small shudder in the room. The curtain breathing once. He carried Jesse back to bed and stood in the doorway a minute listening to make sure the good sound held. He never noticed the dark car parked across the street with its lights off. He never saw the woman in the back seat who had watched the whole thing through his ground floor window. The man hanging up his coat, checking on the boy, eating half a sandwich standing up and wrapping the other half for tomorrow. Sitting down at a table covered in bills and lowering his face into his hands for a long time without a sound. Then, getting up, taking a screwdriver out of a drawer, and going down onto the floor, under the window, to fix the heat in a unit that wasn't even his. At 1 in the morning, with snow stacking up on the sill outside. Vivian Cross sat in the back of the car with her coat still buttoned and did not say a word to her driver until almost 2. She was 41 years old, and she had not been genuinely surprised by another human being in a very long time. Surprise required some belief that people might be more than the sum of what they wanted, and belief was a thing the world had charged her too much for, too many times. Her first husband had taught her the lesson with a forged signature on a shared account. Her business partner had taught it again with a hard drive full of work that was hers. Walked out the front door at 4 in the afternoon while she was on a call. She had rebuilt the company out of a 1-bedroom in 8 months and bought him into irrelevance inside of 2 years. And the press had called her cold, and she had thought, fine, cold keeps. Now she ran a thing that took up most of a skyline. The Callaway Group held interests in hospitals and pharmacies and senior care and, somewhere down in the basement of the portfolio, a health insurance subsidiary so reliably profitable that she almost never had to look at it. That night, her foundation had hosted its winter benefit at the Hartwell, 400 people in black tie writing checks to feel briefly decent about themselves. She came to these things for the donations and nothing else anymore. She'd been upstairs when her assistant mentioned an anonymous cash gift coming in through the service entrance. An old money type would like to hand it over in person, $60,000, and she told him to keep it out of the ballroom until the auction closed. That was why she'd been standing at the dark glass when a man in a snow-soaked work coat picked up the bag that one of the donor's people had set down and forgotten, and gave it back. His name, she said to the dark, and the next morning she had it. The folder landed on her desk at 7. Travis Mercer, 36, widower, 1 son, a cardiac condition, lived on a disability pension and handyman work, 2 months behind on rent. Former firefighter paramedic, Rescue 9. Left the department in the spring of 2020. Injury. She turned the page. Where was the injury, she said, and her assistant, a smooth, pressed young man named Hollis who had worked for her 2 years and learned exactly how much of nothing to say, paused before he answered. The Carlisle Arms. The room went very still around her. She knew the name the way you know, a name you signed once without reading it. The Carlisle Arms. A gas explosion, the spring of 2020. 4 dead, a dozen survivors, a building owner who'd been cited twice for the same corroded line he never fixed. A wave of denied claims that her insurance subsidiary had run through that summer because a clause in the small print let them. She had initialed the quarterly approvals. She had not read the names on the page. She was almost certain now that she had passed her eyes over the word Mercer once, without it meaning anything to her at all. Pull the original file, she said. All of it, the marshal's report, every claim. I want it tonight. Hollis nodded and was nearly out the door when he stopped. There's one more thing. His voice had gotten careful. There's a story that's been moving around the trades for years, that Mercer was somehow the cause. Negligence on the response. It's part of why the denials went through so clean the narrative was already there for people to grab. She looked up at him slowly. And was he? I don't know, Hollis said, and he held her eyes a beat too long. The story never matched what's in the actual report. I checked this morning. He closed the door. The original file came up the elevator that evening in a banker's box, and Vivian did not open it right away. She let it sit on the corner of the desk while she finished a call with Frankfurt and signed off on a press release nobody would read, and she told herself the difference between avoiding a thing and preparing for it, which was a difference she had been telling herself about for most of her adult life. When the cleaning crew had moved past and the floor had gone quiet, she lifted the lid and read his statement first. 7 pages in a medic's flat, blunt hand. He described going into the building at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning with smoke already coming off the second floor. He described carrying a woman down 2 flights and going back. He described a boy under a bed on the 3rd floor and going back. He described the stairwell on his 4th trip in, the way the ceiling came down across his shoulder while he had a man's belt in his fist, and how he dragged the man another 20 feet on a shoulder he already knew was finished. She read one line twice. I knew the arm was gone before I got him to the air, but he was breathing, so it didn't seem like the time to think about the arm. The marshal's report came next. The cause was a gas line the owner had been ordered to replace and had patched with tape instead. There was no allegation anywhere of any failure by the response crew. There was no mention of Travis Mercer except as a man who had gone in 4 times and come out on a backboard. The insurance memo she read last, and it was thin. 2 pages from a claims supervisor she'd never heard of, recommending denial on owner noncompliance voiding coverage under a section number, and a signature page where her own initials sat in the corner beside 40-some other claim numbers she had never once slowed down for. The decision had bankrupted a building owner, scattered the survivors, and pushed a wall of medical and funeral debt out into a city that had nowhere to put it. So it had put it on the only man still standing in the wreckage who couldn't talk back, because he was busy learning to lift a coffee cup with the wrong arm. She did not cry. She had not cried in years and was not going to start over paperwork, but she sat in the dim office a long time with her hand flat on the open folder, and she understood, with a clarity that felt almost surgical, that the empire she'd built and the ruin of the man under that ground floor window were the same building. 2 ends of one wire. She picked up the phone. I need a house, she said. Small, suburban, something that actually needs work. Buy it through one of the holding companies, nothing with my name on it, put the deed under Vivian Hale. Make her recently divorced, make her quiet. There was a silence on the line, and then a careful, yes ma'am, and she hung up before he could ask the only question that mattered. The house in Lakewood was the color of weak coffee, with a porch that listed a couple degrees to the left and a side door that wouldn't latch without a hip thrown into it. By Friday she had a key, a name she'd practiced twice in the bathroom mirror until it stopped sounding like a lie, and a handyman's number off a flyer that her people had arranged to leave under the wiper of the modest used sedan she'd bought for exactly this. She called from the empty kitchen, standing at the counter, listening to the windwork at a loose pane upstairs. Mercer Repair. The voice was lower than she remembered and even. My name's Vivian Hale, she said, turning toward the window like he could see her through the line. I just took a place over on Donnelly. The previous owners left it rougher than the listing let on. I'm told you do general work. I do. She could hear, somewhere behind his voice, a small boy asking a question. I can come Saturday, $35 an hour. I'll give you an estimate before I touch anything. He showed up at 3 minutes to 10. She'd been at the front window the better part of an hour. In daylight, he was smaller than the man at the dark glass. The work coat the same, the boots the same, but his hair was newly cut, which she hadn't expected from a man with $5 to his name. And when he shook her hand at the door, his grip was firm and somehow careful, the way you hold a thing that might be more fragile than it looks. Mrs. Hale. Vivian, please. He stepped past her into the hall, already looking at the ceiling, the corners, the slope of the floor under his boots. Whoever painted last covered up some water damage up in that corner. I'd want eyes on that before anything else. Whatever you think. He glanced at her then with the slightly puzzled look of a man used to clients who had a great many more opinions, and went up the stairs. She had imagined it would feel like espionage. It did not. It felt like sitting across from the only person in years who looked at her without first calculating what she could do for him. He gave her the estimate after an hour, written on a little pad in handwriting she now recognized, and he charged less than the work was worth. When she asked him why, he said, "Because that's what it costs," in a voice that didn't leave room to argue. He never flirted. He never once asked about the divorce she'd invented. He didn't look at her clothes or her car or the way every appliance in the kitchen was suspiciously new. He looked at the wiring in the basement and frowned at the water heater and told her it wouldn't survive a hard freeze. On his third visit, she set her wallet on the counter and stepped out to take a call. And when she came back, it was right where she'd left it, and he was on the back porch testing a rail. She walked out with the wallet in her hand. There was $1,100 in this. He looked at her without confusion. "I saw. You didn't count it." "It's not mine to count, ma'am." And he went back to the rail. She stood in the doorway and felt something in her chest do a thing she had no name for. The first time the boy came was a Saturday. He'd warned her the night before, sitter canceled, couldn't turn down half a day's pay right now, the kid would stay in the truck with a book. "Bring him in," she'd said before she decided to say it. "It's too cold for a truck." Jesse came up the front walk holding his father's hand and a spiral notebook gone soft at the spine. He had a knit hat a size too big pushed nearly to his eyebrows, and he studied her from under it like she was a math problem. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "You look tired like my mom looked in the picture. But nice." Travis made a small sound behind him. She didn't turn around. She looked down at the boy and felt the floor of the room tip a degree under her. "Thank you," she said carefully. "What are you drawing?" He flipped the notebook open. It was full of houses, floor plans, really, room after room, mapped out in a careful, blocky hand. Doors marked, little arrows showing where the heat would go. "These are houses I'm gonna build," he said. "When my heart's all the way fixed, this one has a room just for being warm in. That's a good thing to have a room for. My dad says you build it so the cold can't find the people inside." By lunch, he'd spread the notebook on the living room floor and was working on a new one, tongue between his teeth, and when she set a sandwich beside him, he tore the page off and held it up without ceremony. It was a house, and inside the house he'd drawn 3 small stick people. A tall one, a small one, and a third figure standing a little apart with long hair that she understood was meant to be her. Under it, in his blocky letters, "The Warm House." She did not show it to Travis. She folded it once and slid it into her coat, and she did not take it out again for many days. The first sign of trouble came 8 days later. A contractor who'd hired Travis to rewire a basement on the west side called and canceled in a voice that didn't quite match its own words. 2 days after that, a man on Madison who'd used him 3 times said kindly that things were getting slow on his end. By the end of the second week, the only steady work Travis had left was a coffee-colored house in Lakewood. He said nothing to her about it. But she heard him on the back porch one afternoon, voice low, asking somebody, "What exactly is the story people are telling?" A pause. Then, "That was 5 years ago, and that is not what happened." Another pause. "No, I get it." And he stood with his hand over his mouth for a long minute before he came in and went back to work like nothing had moved. That same night, in a parking structure 2 blocks from the Callaway Tower, Hollis sat in his car with a phone to his ear and spoke quietly to a man whose name he was careful never to say aloud. "She's wobbling," he said. "I'll take care of it." Then he drove home and slept like a baby. The story of the Carlisle Arms moved through the trades the way old stories move, half remembered, sharpened in the retelling, given new edges by people who hadn't been there. A drywaller heard it from his brother-in-law. A super heard it from a leasing manager. By the 3rd week, the version going around said Travis had been hungover that morning, or asleep at the station, or somehow responsible for a gas line he'd never laid a hand on. It didn't have to be consistent. It only had to be loud. His landlord called and cut the 5 days to 3. Jesse found out, the way kids find out everything. It was a Tuesday, and the boy was watching a little kitchen TV at the Donnelly house while his father regrouted a tub upstairs, and a daytime business program ran a segment on the most powerful women in American healthcare. The third woman was a brunette in a charcoal jacket standing in front of a glass tower, and the bar across the bottom read Vision Cross, CEO, the Callaway Group, parent of Sentinel Health and 9 other firms. Jesse watched for a while. Then he walked to the foot of the stairs and called up, calm as anything, "Dad." Miss Vivian's on TV. There was a sound from above. A man setting a tool down slow and flat on a tile floor. He came down the stairs the way you walk toward a hospital room, stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the screen for 9 more seconds before the anchor moved on. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at Vivian, who had come in from the front room and was standing very still with both hands at her sides. "Jesse," he said, "get your coat." "Dad." "Coat, bud." The boy went. Travis turned and looked at her, and the look was not the one she braced for. Not hatred, not even anger. Just the flat, courteous distance of a man being walked out of a room he'd never actually been welcome in. "You get what you needed, Mrs. Cross." "Travis, don't. Let me." "I said don't." His voice didn't rise. It got smaller and more final. "You don't come near him again. I don't know what this was to you, and I don't want to. We're done." He set the house key on the counter beside the wallet she'd left out 3 weeks back, took his son's hand at the door, and he did not look back. She stood in the kitchen a long time after the truck was gone. 48 hours later, Travis sat at his own table with a duffel at his feet and a bus schedule in front of him. Maya had a great aunt in a town outside Columbus, an old woman alone on a quiet street who had said yes when he called. He'd sold the truck. He'd sold the tools that didn't fit in the bag. The bus left at 6. He was checking the boy's medications one more time when Jesse came out of his room with a hand pressed flat to his chest and said, "Dad," and Travis looked up and knew the shape of it before the word was all the way out. The color was wrong. The breathing was wrong, that thin fluttering wrongness that meant the hospital and meant it now. He carried Jesse down to the curb because the lobby was empty and there was no time to wait on anyone, and he half ran the 6 blocks to St. Tree, Bridges with the boy against his chest and the snow coming down in that same slow, patient way it had the night he'd found the bag. The triage nurse took one look at the boy's lips and called for a bed. 10 minutes later, a clerk with a practiced sorry face told him the cardiac intensive program required a $14,000 deposit before they could admit. And was there a card, sir? Or a family member they could reach? He stood with both hands flat on the counter and worked very hard to keep his face still. By the time a nurse came to walk him to a small office down the hall, the deposit had already cleared. Paid in full, by wire, from an account he didn't know, under the name V. Cross. He read the name twice. Then he pushed the receipt back across the counter. "Refund it." "Sir?" "Refund it. All of it. I'll find another way." "Sir, your son." I said refund it. What he didn't know was that across the city, in an office where the lights had not gone off all night, Vivian Cross was opening the first email from a reporter at the Plain Dealer, asking her to comment on what they were calling a month-long covert surveillance of a working-class single father. He didn't know the source quoted in the email was a senior member of her own executive staff. He didn't know the same story would run in the morning with a photo of her sedan parked on his snowbank street, or that Callaway stock would open down nearly a quarter before lunch, or that her board would be on the phone with her by 10. He knew only that his son was on the far side of a swinging door with a breath like a wet little engine, and that the one person on earth who could afford to keep him alive was the one person he could not let near him. He sat down in a plastic chair in the corner and put his head in his hands. And for the first time in his life, he understood that pride could be a thing that killed somebody you loved. A doctor came out at 1 in the morning to say the boy was stable on a basic protocol, for now, with a weight on the, for now that she sat down twice. If he slipped in the night, the basic protocol wouldn't be enough, and the intensive program wasn't an option without the deposit. He said he understood. He counted the bills in his wallet, which came to $26, and put it back in his pocket, and watched the vending machine hum. Across town, Vivian sat at her desk with 2 documents in front of her. The first was a resignation letter the board chair had drafted and emailed her at midnight. Language she had used herself against other people many times, about governance risk and the good of the company, requiring only her name. The board had agreed to terms that would let her keep nearly everything she built. The equity, the buildings, the accounts. She would lose the chair. She would walk away rich enough that no one she ever met again would call her anything else. The second document was the Carlisle file, The report, the denials, the names, the memo, the signature page where her own initials sat in the corner beside claim numbers she had never paused over. She had read it through 4 times in the last 2 days. She thought about a man who had handed a bag of cash across a counter and walked off without leaving his name. She thought about a boy in a too big hat drawing a house with a room for being warm in. She thought about a wallet on a counter that nobody had touched. She thought about the line, "He was breathing, so it didn't seem like the time to think about the arm." She picked up a pen and drew it across the resignation letter, one long, clean diagonal. Then she woke her communications director out of a dead sleep, set a press conference, 9 a.m., the lobby, every outlet, no screened questions. To his credit, the man asked only one thing. "What's the subject?" "The Carlisle Arms, 2020. A small silence. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she said, and hung up, and stood at the window watching the dawn come up gray over the lake, and felt something that was very close to relief. That this was the first decision she had made in 20 years that didn't trade away the right thing to keep the wrong one. She stood at a plain wooden lectern at 9 sharp, no makeup, no notes, a navy suit she'd owned for a decade. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't thank them for coming. "In the spring of 2020, she said, a building called the Carlisle Arms exploded on the near west side of the city. 4 people died. 12 lived. They lived because a firefighter and paramedic named Travis Mercer went into that building 4 times against orders and carried them out one at a time, and came out the 4th time with an injury that ended his career." The room had been murmuring. The murmuring stopped. The cause was a gas line the building's owner had been ordered to replace and never did. The fire marshal's report was clear. It made no allegation against the response. It made no allegation against Travis Mercer. The negligence was the owner's, and the owner carried a policy with Sentinel Health, a subsidiary of the Callaway Group. She did not look down. Sentinel denied every claim tied to that explosion. Those denials move through this company's quarterly approvals. My initials are on the page. I did not read the names. That is not a defense, that is a confession. A wave went through the reporters. She did not slow. In the years after, in a city that needed someone to blame, a story started up in the trades that Travis Mercer was somehow the cause of the disaster he ran into 4 times. That story is false. It was convenient. This company never corrected it because the silence served us. A man who saved 12 lives has spent 5 years being called a coward in every room where he goes to look for work. She put both hands flat on the lectern. Today, the Callaway Group is establishing the Maya Mercer Foundation, named for his late wife. It will provide medical care, housing, and family support to first responders injured in the line of duty across the state of Ohio. I am committing $90 million of my personal assets as its endowment. Sentinel will reopen and re-adjudicate every claim tied to the Carlisle Arms, backdated with interest. She drew a breath. And effective at the end of this statement, I am resigning as chief executive of the Callaway Group. I will not keep a board seat. I will not keep a consulting role. I am the person whose name is on the page. The page is wrong. The page is mine. She didn't take questions. She walked off the riser, through the lobby, out the doors, and into a car at the curb, and she did not look back. In the waiting room at St. Bridget's, Travis watched it on a muted TV above the vending machine, and somewhere in the second sentence he understood she was not speaking to the cameras. She never said his son's name. She never mentioned a bag, or a house on Donnelly, or a kitchen in February where he'd told her very quietly to stay away from his child. She gave him back the only thing he had never been able to give back himself, which was his name. A woman in scrubs crossed the room and sat down beside him with a clipboard and a careful face. "Mr. Mercer, there's a change in your son's coverage." He looked at her. "The Maya Mercer Foundation has notified us that Jesse's care is funded under their first responder family program. The intensive protocol is reauthorized. We can move him this morning." He didn't speak for a moment. "That's the foundation," he said. "Not a person. It's the foundation, Mr. Mercer. The foundation pays." He looked at his hands. He looked at the screen, where a graphic now showed Callaway stock falling in a clean, almost graceful line, and he understood what she had done. She had not put her name on a wire. She had put it on a building and built the building around the wire so that he could take the help and owe nothing to anyone except the city he had once been willing to die for. It was not charity. It was a debt paid back in the only currency he had ever agreed to take, which was the truth. "Yeah," he said. "Move him." Jesse came off the intensive protocol 36 hours later. He woke with his hair flat on one side and his voice scratchy, and the first thing he asked for was his notebook. That afternoon he drew a hospital window with snow falling past it, and a boy in a bed, and a man asleep in a chair beside him, and at the bottom he wrote, "We kept him." Travis folded it once and slid it into the breast pocket of his coat, against his shirt, and he did not take it out for a long time. 6 months later, the days had gone warm. Travis took a lease on a narrow brick storefront on a corner in Lakewood that had been a shoe repair for 40 years, and then nothing for 10. He kept the old tin ceiling. He painted the door a dark green. He hung a plain wooden sign that read, "Mercer and Son." The and Son had been Jesse's idea. Travis told him he didn't have to be on the sign if he didn't want, and the boy informed him, with the gravity only an 8-year-old can manage, that he absolutely did. The shop never made him rich. It made him enough. Old men came in with lamps and clocks and a vacuum that had belonged to somebody's mother. Jesse sat at a little desk by the back window with his notebook, drawing his houses, listening to his father talk to people who, more and more, were starting to talk back. Vivian was not in the news anymore. The cycle that followed her resignation had been brutal, and then, the way of these things, had been replaced by another, and then the one after that. The foundation grew quietly under a small board that did not carry her name. Hollis had been walked out of the tower inside 72 hours, on the recommendation of an internal review he hadn't known was running, and where he'd gone after was not her concern. She lived in a smaller place on the east side now, in a building with no doorman, and she had learned, slowly and with some embarrassment, how to do her own grocery shopping. To her own surprise, she did not miss any of what she'd handed back. In late May, she went to walk in the metro parks because the trees were full and the light through them was the color of clean paper, and she had not gone there to find him. She saw the boy first. He was sitting in the grass under an oak with the notebook open across his knees, and he looked up the instant she came around the bend, like he'd heard her coming. "Miss Vivian." He was up and across the grass and around her waist before his father, on a bench 10 yards off with a paper cup of coffee, had time to register it. "You grew," she said into the top of his head. "You grew too," Jesse said. "Your hair's longer." Travis came over slow, the cup still in his hand. He didn't put it down, and he didn't put out his hand. He stopped a few feet away. "Hello, Mrs. Cross." "Vivian, please." "Vivian." Jesse let go, looked up at his father, and with the diplomatic instinct of a kid who knew when adults needed the air, announced he was going to go draw the creek, and walked off in a deliberate way that fooled exactly no one to a bench 30 feet off with a clear view of both of them. For a while neither adult spoke. A breeze worked through the leaves above them. "Why'd you follow me home that night?" Travis said. She'd thought, more times than she'd admit, about what she'd say if he ever asked. "Because for the first time in my life," she said, "I just watched a man with every reason on earth to keep that money do the right thing anyway, and I needed to know if somebody like that was real. I didn't believe one could be." He looked at her a long time. "And now?" She glanced toward the bench where the boy sat bent over his notebook, the pencil moving in small, careful arcs. "Now I believe it," she said, "and I'm learning how to be one." He didn't answer right away. He looked at the coffee in his hand. He looked off in the direction of his shop, which wasn't visible from there. Then he looked back at her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not quite a smile, more the thing a smile becomes in a man who hasn't let himself have one in a long time. "Just has been asking when you were going to come by," he said. "Has he?" "For a few months." "And what do you tell him?" He looked at her. "I tell him soon," he said. "I keep telling him soon." Across the grass, the boy tore a page off his notebook, studied it, and added one thing in the lower corner in his careful, blocky letters. The drawing showed a house with the front door dark green and 3 people standing on the porch where the cold couldn't find them. He didn't write the warm house this time. He wrote the keepers, and under that, smaller. He drew a fourth small figure standing in the open doorway, halfway in, like someone deciding to come the rest of the way inside. I keep coming back to that bag in the snow and how easy the wrong choice would have looked from the outside. $31 in the bank, a notice on the door, a boy down the hall whose heart had been wrong since birth. If Travis had kept that $60,000, almost anyone would have understood, but he carried it back inside, and that single act set everything that followed into motion. Nothing in the story happened by luck. A woman watched a man do the hard, quiet, right thing when no one was looking, and that's the only reason she ever knocked on his door. What I take from Travis is that being broke and being good are not the same thing, and he never let the two get confused, even on the night he had every reason to. His son said it back to him at the kitchen table because he'd heard it 100 times. That kind of honesty isn't loud. It's a man returning a wallet he didn't count, charging less than the work was worth because that's what the work cost. Character is just the sum of what you do when the room is empty, and Travis filled those empty rooms with the same decency every single time. But goodness alone wasn't enough, and I think that's the part people miss. Vivian could have stuffed a wire transfer into a hospital account and felt clean. Instead, she stopped and read the file 4 times. She thought it through. She understood that handing him cash would humiliate him, so she built a foundation around the money so he could accept help and still owe nothing but the truth. That's the difference between meaning well and doing well. You have to be smart enough to give a person help in a shape they can actually hold. She didn't just feel sorry. She figured out exactly what would heal instead of wound. And then there's the part nobody can do for you, which is to keep standing. Travis lost his work to a lie he didn't start. He sold his truck. He packed a duffel bag at 6 in the morning. He refused $14,000 he desperately needed because his pride wouldn't bend, and pride almost cost him the one thing he couldn't lose. The strength wasn't in never breaking. It was in carrying his son 6 blocks through the snow anyway, and sitting in a plastic chair counting $26 and still not quitting on the boy. So when I watch Travis open that green door on a shop that says Mercer and Son, I don't see a man who got rescued. I see a man who told the truth when it was expensive, who finally let himself be helped, and who never put his son down even when his arms gave out. Do the right thing in the dark. Be wise about how you carry it. And hold on when there's nothing left to hold on with. Everything else eventually finds its way back to you.